Hey guys, welcome back. BDCKR here, and we're back with a bit of a different video from what we normally do. This is going to be, it's as of yet untitled, but this is going to be how we have maximized our efficiency farming online multiplayer.
It's a how-to video, and it demonstrates, exactly what you said.
So what we're going to go through here is the team that we use and the exact gear loadout, and then we're going to talk a lot more about why it works. So right at the top, you guys can see what we do if you just want to copy it, and then we're going to go into as much detail as possible, because in a lot of cases, the question that we get asked is, I don't have this gear, or I don't have this character, what do I do? And this isn't going to be specific tips, right? Because that's a really sort of nebulous question, but what this is going to be is sort of our philosophy and everything that we've planned for in making this team. And it gives you an opportunity to sort of do the same process with whatever equipment you have if you don't have ours.
So it's the principle and the setup for how we got to this point where we picked these specific characters with these specific gears in this specific order on the team.
And also a little bit of a breakdown of how we play with this specific team to make it as fast as possible if you're using it but you're not getting the times that we are. And just a bit of a spoiler alert, we're getting about 5 minutes for a really efficient fight here, and probably about 6 minutes as a closer to an average fight.
Yeah. So the first two ultimate runs, I think, only take 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Of real time.
So that's sort of the fastest that we've managed to get it. But just without making you guys wait too long, the team setup is we have Deathstroke with Tantu Totem, Master's Death Card, and League of Assassins Knives. We have Flashpoint Batman with Astro Harness, Mutated Bone Spikes, and Promethean Longsword. And we have Aquaman with Razagul Scimitar, Claw of Horus, and Quake Engine. These are all Flashpoint characters. I should have mentioned, right? These aren't like original universe Deathstroke. So this is a Flashpoint team.
It's not the bronze.
Yeah. So like we said, this is probably the ideal execution. And right off the bat, we can go over a few of probably the most important things if you want a really fast online multiplayer battle.
Yeah.
Or a really fast online multiplayer battle that you can consistently win, which we'll talk about a little more later.
Yeah. So Flashpoint Deathstroke, Tantu Totem, Master's Death Card.
Yeah, that's incredibly important.
Right, because even Flashpoint Batman, who does the biggest amount of basic damage, doesn't do enough basic damage when you've geared him out for that kind of output to make up for the absolute huge damage per second that you can get out of doing specials.
Yeah, without Tantu Totems and Master's Death Card, you're not going to be dealing near as much damage per second. Your fights are going to be longer, no matter what, non-negotiably.
Right. League of Assassins Knives, because not only does it boost the Deathstroke Special 1, there's also splash damage from Special 1 and a huge amount of it, 50%, so that everybody coming in is already softened up a bit.
Mm-hmm. Another really important thing is even though you want to use your specials a lot, right, if you can, specials aren't always going to be the best depending on who you're fighting to mow through them, right?
Right, so you've got a specials dodger, what you still need is a basic damage dealer.
Yeah, so that's non-negotiable too because you're going to run into fights if you are only relying on specials, right? That's great for most fights, but sometimes you'll run into fights in which you're sort of weak. You're a little noodly.
Yeah, and it's not even so much that you'll lose the fight, because you'll still win it. When you've got Tantu Totem, you've got somebody who's going to dodge specials, you'll still knock them out, but the animation of their passive to evade the special sucks up time.
Yeah.
And that's time that you could actually avoid spending if you have a powerful basic damage dealer like Flashpoint Batman. So he's geared with 2 pieces of basic damage boosting, and one is increased crit chance, one is heal on Special 1, and then the last gear is Astro Harness, because most basic damage dealers, I wouldn't do that, because Flashpoint Batman's passive is so good, he boosts his basic damage way above what it should be, given that he's level 50 elite 5. And so better to make him a little bit hardier, and he's still got enough basic damage output with 2 swipe specials to knock the other guy out.
Yeah.
And I guess the final principle that we demonstrate with Aquaman is, what we demonstrated originally with, is even your tank has to have offensive potential. Technically, Aquaman isn't so much the tank. I mean, his passive does lend a little bit of tankiness to everybody.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, maybe Batman is the real tank because he's got Astro Harness, and Aquaman is more like a meat shield. So he doesn't have any advantages to be a tank. But if he's last man standing, his damage over time helps bleed out anybody. His Claw of Horus helps break down gears, and Quake Engine means that you're just increasing his offensive potential, so he's doing way more damage over time with whoever's left.
Yeah, because really, when you want fast, consistently winnable fights, you want to, if something goes wrong, you want your last guy to still be able to clean up, right?
Yeah.
And you also want to not waste any time if you have to swap to your tank for any reason. You want to still be able to keep up that damage output and not have it be wasted time in between swap outs.
Right.
Right? And I think we should be clear here too, if we haven't mentioned it earlier, that the reason why this is going to improve your rank in online multiplayer is if you have a limited amount of time, there's only so much time you can play. This is how you get the most battle points per minute spent playing. This is how you take whatever time you have and make it do the most possible work for you, which is doing fast battles with as much battle points as you can get, basically.
And it may not be so obvious, and we'll talk specifically about this team, but you really need to have a strategy. And it's not just a team makeup, but it's a plan so that automatically, when the game starts, you know what you're going to do. You have a counter for every potential situation that could slow you down. And it's got to be a strategy that doesn't change too much, especially for the first move, because if your first move doesn't require you to know what gear the other team has, you save a bunch of time by not looking at the other team. Yeah,
so you want to be able to counter every possible enemy team, and you want to be able to counter every possible enemy team in pretty much the same way, in a way that you can figure out on the fly without the sort of time to hesitate and consider, right?
Right.
And so as you can probably tell from what we've been talking about, this is really meant to shave down every last possible second, right? We're looking for a team that is really efficient in every single way and that can just mow through people. And I think...
And there's an example that we're hitting the fight button before we've even seen the next team come up. So we don't care who the team is, we don't care what their loadout is, and we've just shaved a few seconds by doing that.
Mm-hmm. And I think we can go through maybe a little more about how this specific team is loaded up, and then we can talk about all the things that it can counter, that you might run into issues with, a team that isn't specifically considering it.
Right. So what we just saw with Aquaman starting up front was he's got Razzle Scimitar for the bar of power, he's got Claw of Horus, and a 75% chance with Claw of Horus to shatter gear.
Yeah.
So if that's 75% chance, 25% chance he won't, but then that 75% chance... 3 different gears. Each gear has basically 25% chance of getting shattered.
Yeah, and this is another one of those times where we're really going to talk about shaving a low number of seconds. But what that's really good for is if you run into a circumstance in which you're up against Astro Harness. Because Astro Harness will delay your fight a minimum of 5 seconds, and I think a maximum of 15 seconds, right? Plus sort of the time surrounding it. So maybe even a little bit more, especially if you're using specials to run down the timer on that, which is one of the reasons why it's important to have Astro Harness, so you don't need to use specials, which use more real-life time, even if they don't tell you about any the in-game time. But you have a 25% chance of skipping Astro Harness if you use your first special and shatter the gear.
Yeah.
And that saves you a significant amount of time. And that stuff, again, it doesn't seem like a lot, but it adds up. When you put it all together, it saves a non-zero amount of time, which is really the important part here. It does it sometimes, and you don't have to think about it. So we're talking about it now, and it might seem like it's not worth talking about. But when it actually happens, it's automatic. You don't have to spend any time, effort, or energy getting that time back.
Right. And I guess the contrast, it's probably worth talking about the difference between Astro Harness and not Astro Harness, is just when there's no Astro Harness, Aquaman. He shatters, he doesn't shatter, but he's also causing bleed damage, 20% damage boost. So that means when we tag in our normal strategy of bringing in Deathstroke to do a special one, each hit is doing 20% more damage. Each hit is splashing 50% damage, and it's usually enough to knock them out with one special one.
Yeah.
The second person tagging in has the damage over time and the bleed damage that transfers over because of Quake Engine on Aquaman. Mm-hmm. They're already softened up from Deathstroke. He does a few more special one hits, more splash damage, so the third guy tagging in ends up with very little health left, hopefully. Maybe not bleeding anymore, but still softened up enough that another special one, or even the tail end of a special one, would be enough to actually knock him out.
Yeah, so this really just boosts your damage that last little bit in this circumstances that you would need it. And the special one does take time from Aquaman, right? Yeah. And there's not every fight you're going to need it, but as we go through what our strategy for each sort of counter is, the real time that's saved in this is not having to think about it and not having to look at their team or make any decisions, because this is always the best move.
Yeah.
And on average, we are of the opinion, although I guess you would have to crunch the numbers in a really granular way, we think this is, the ultimately time-saving move.
So that's 9 minutes and 50-something seconds for 2 ultimate runs, and we're including every single load time from the beginning.
Yeah.
So other considerations. If your first opponent is Killing Joke Joker, and we're going to see, if we haven't seen it, I can't remember if we've already seen it or not, but we're definitely going to see one here.
So, sorry, just 1 second.
Yep.
These are specific counters that would slow down sort of an average team, or that might slow down your team if you weren't planning for them, which would make you, either have fights take longer or maybe make you lose. And we're going to talk about here just specifically how this team deals with it. But for anybody who doesn't have these resources, this is an opportunity for you to figure out what stuff you're going to need to plan for, and figure out how your own teams are going to deal with these circumstances.
That's an absolutely good point. Sometimes I get a little bit too caught up in the granular, like the nitty gritty stuff, that moment of watching what we're doing, but you're absolutely right. That's a principle that you need to plan for. So when you've got a first opponent that's Killing Joke Joker, and here's a good example. Astro Harness. He comes in with Astro Harness. He's not the first player. We've already softened up with all its splash damage that we don't have to worry about him too much.
Yeah.
And this is going to cost us some time because anytime they do a super, but it's not like we had any control over it because by the time Batman comes in, he's got the 3 bars of power.
Yeah.
So with Killing Joke Joker, you start off Aquaman the same. If his health is low enough, you can finish Killing Joke Joker with Aquaman, then tag in Batman with Astro Harness to eat a super because, Killing Joke Joker's passive gives his teammates 3 bars or full power when he gets knocked out. If his health isn't low enough, then just tag in Batman with Astro Harness just right away to finish him off quickly, and quick enough that Batman still has his first invulnerability, and that'll eat the super. Now, again, the super takes time, but if your fight's going to take longer if you let any of your guys get your really high damage per second guys get knocked out. One way you can gamble with that on this particular team is that if they tag in and you've got Batman's been there long enough that he can tag out, you can tag in Deathstroke, and the Master's Death card prevents them from using their super. You do a special one, and that'll save you even more time.
Yeah. So that was if your first opponent is Killing Joke Joker.
Right.
Next up, if your first opponent is Astro Harness, we talked about that a little bit, but just you start off the exact same because you got a 25% chance of shattering the Astro Harness.
And this is why in the first slot matters way more. We've already gotten through 2 invulnerabilities. This is his last one.
Yeah, so there's not a lot of time wasted. It's that single 5-second period.
Right.
Yeah, but so if it's the first slot, you got a 25% chance of shattering Astro Harness just by starting off with Aquaman using his first special. You follow up with Batman, so they're not building power as quickly when they're invulnerable compared to Deathstroke's special one, which has like a multi-hit power gen. And if somebody else has the Astro Harness, you just do the usual and you tag out if Deathstroke runs out of power. It's not a big deal.
Oh, and here it is. This is perfect. Astro Harness in the first slot. We shot anyways. Now, unfortunately, the 75% chance of not shattering Astro Harness triggered, so we're just using Batman because his basic attacks are still faster than doing a special as far as real time goes.
So there we go. Next up, so that was first opponent has Astro Harness.
Right.
Next up, it's a power dampening team.
Right.
So again, you do the usual, and that's, as we talk more and more about it, we're going to say that a lot. You just have to do the same thing basically, right? You still get 1 power Bower on Deathstroke's tag in, and since we're relying on special 1 only for actually mowing through them, that's usually enough. In this case, it's more important to try to max out.
Yeah, to max out the
special damage for both Deathstroke and Aquaman.
All right, so this is the example. Actually, maybe we should jump ahead because this is another example of somebody that might be a problem, which is Raven.
Yeah.
And you can see we just did the usual, which is launch Aquaman's Trident. If she health swaps, which she did, she isn't knocking out Deathstroke, right?
Yeah.
She didn't. We just get to do more splash damage so that when her teammates come in, they have even less health. And the little bit of health that's left over after Deathstroke finally gets knocked out, right? He took out two opponents. Batman can quickly mop up the game.
Yeah, so there we go. That's dealing with Raven. And just to finish up with the power dampening team, just something a little more granular. Using Master's Death Cart protection when you come in, you can, usually get a unblocked tap combo.
Yep.
Not always, but if you time it right. And if the combo ender hits with the League of Assassins Knives power gen boost, even on a dampening team, that's enough to get you to the second bar of power.
Right.
And so that's something you can do. Take an extra second or two if you don't need it, but it will, give you that extra damage if you end up needing it, instead of having to sort of try to get a tap combo in between specials, which is a little bit harder to pull off.
Right. And we're seeing another example of Raven, and because she tagged in so late, she's got very little health, and if she health swaps, we don't really care, and because she had so little health, the damage from the special one was actually enough to take her out. You've got to really commit to that, because if you try to be too fine about it, and maybe you've got a guy who's got a high damage special one, it's actually much faster and easier to do the health swap twice with somebody who's got a multi-hit high damage special.
Yeah. Next up, an issue you can run into is Gaslight Batman in the first slot. You want to take that away?
We saw that earlier. So we start with Aquaman's Bleed, and because of his passive taking away our second bar of power with Master's Death card, and he's temporarily causes us to burn. It's just as fast, and maybe even slightly faster, to use Aquaman to finish him off. I mean, you can't go ahead and use Deathstroke. The beauty of this particular team is we're relying on a special specialist that needs special one.
Yeah.
So even though he won't get a second bar of power, because the Master's Death card power gen will be negated, most of the time you will still be fast enough. The problem is if, for whatever reason, you don't max out the special, somebody happens to have high health or they're blocking, then you may need to tag out Deathstroke to get his power back, and that slows the game down a bit. And we don't want that.
Next up, we have Arkham Knight Batgirl, and she's actually more dangerous not in the first slot.
Right. So the big problem with Arkham Knight Batgirl is that she can tag in when you knock somebody out, stun you, and then do a bunch of damage. If there's splash damage to go with it, it can potentially knock out your team. So you start with Aquaman Bleed, and you tag in Batman to finish off the opponent quickly enough before his first invulnerability finishes, so that her stun doesn't leave him completely vulnerable. I'm pretty sure actually, because he's during his invulnerability, the stun won't actually register.
Yeah.
I mean, and we're watching another fight. I mean, we're preparing for all these situations, but a lot of the fights, when none of these specific things show up, we're actually avoiding any problem. It's a fast fight.
Yeah.
You just mow right through them.
There's a lot of things that you have to specifically prepare for, but that doesn't mean that they come up a lot, right? For the number of things we're listing here, it would seem like that would be almost every fight, but it's nowhere near that.
Right. And I want to point out again, think of all the time you're saving by just tapping to fight right away, not looking at the team, not bothering, because whatever happens, we've got something prepared for it.
Yeah, let's maybe pick up the pace a little bit here so we can fit the video size. But next up, we have Arkham Knight Harley Quinn.
Oh, and that was just 2 fights ago.
Yeah.
So when she's not in first slot, you're worried that she's going to do hazard entry damage. So she will, when you take somebody in, she will bring out a machine gun and shoot you. So you start in Aquaman, tag in Deathstroke. All you have to do is be ready to block. If the animation doesn't show up for Harley Quinn, don't bother blocking and just do the usual. But if it does, block. Her entry hazard passive, the damage that she does when you tag in, isn't enough to knock you out. And when she actually finishes, you still have your opening to do a special one. So you do just whatever you normally do. You just happen to have a little bit less health when you started.
Yeah. Next up, we have the Mother Box.
Oh, all right. So Mother Box, why that matters is because Mother Box, whoever has it, whether it's the opponent in first slot, second or third, it will take away your starting power. So Aquaman loses his power. So he can't do a special one. The important thing is to recognize it early enough so that you get in the habit of tapping special one with Aquaman as soon as the game starts, and you got to realize relatively quickly, oh, something's wrong. It's not happening. You don't just stand there and keep on tapping. Tag him out right away. And commit to Deathstroke. Yeah.
And basically, you played as normal, right? If you're running into the Astro Harness, as we recommended, you're probably going to want to switch in Batman. And you're going to want to switch in Deathstroke if you're not facing the Astro Harness. So it's just sort of business as normal. And usually, Deathstroke does enough damage without the bleed boost. So you'll probably be fine. And if not, you sort of just have to make up the damage wherever you best see fit, either with Batman to clean up with basic damage or try to build up a little more power if you need it to do that last little bit with Deathstroke.
Oh, and I should point out that something that we don't run into with this team that you will actually have to deal with if you're using a different team. The tag-in stunners that have Cloak of Destiny or Necron's Scythe that will do boosted damage against you if they tag in and stun you. Because Flashpoint Deathstroke Special 1 is multi-hit, and because we rely on that so much, and this is a good example, right? Luke Bane can tag in and stun. We didn't look at Batgirl, but she might have Cloak of Destiny. We don't want her to stun us. And because his Special 1 is multi-hit, in the middle of his special, he can't be stunned when a new person tags in.
The drawback is that you don't get to do as much splash damage, but as we've seen here, it's actually probably better to, in the long run, to not get the stun effects on tag-ins.
Right. Oh, and I should point out, when you say that, it's because some of the hits of his multi-special one don't connect, and the ones that don't connect, no splash damage. So even though his special one, in theory, can do a lot of damage, because it goes across different characters, we knock out one, some of them miss, and then the last hit might hit the last one.
Yeah.
It's less damage, but it offers that protection, because really the ultimate slowdown, the ultimate cost to your time is if you lose a fight.
Yeah.
Because in an ultimate battle, you get 60% bonus for completing the ladder, 60% of what you would have gotten in the whole ultimate, right?
Yeah, so you're losing more than a third of your effective battle points every time you lose from however many fights you played up until that point. So if you lose on the first fight, you're losing a third of, one fight's worth of battle points, basically.
Yeah.
But if you lose near the end, you're losing a significant number of battle points, and you're losing a fight and getting nothing from that fight. So that's a huge expenditure of your time. The last team, before we get into some of the sort of less obvious issues for maximizing speed, just to clean up, is the Red Sun Green Lantern team. And the main issue there is you're not dealing crit damage, right?
Right.
So Aquaman's bleed plus hitting a higher percentage damage on Deathstroke special, so you do have to be a little more careful when you're using your special.
Yeah.
Can be enough to knock out the first player.
Yeah, as long as it'll cost you both special ones. And you want to be at least 166 or 200%, but that's enough. And I guess this is kind of an example. It's not a perfect example because this is not a full Red Sun team. But what's cool is the first person not being Red Sun meant we could do a bunch of splash damage. He was softened up already, and he's out. And there's another 5-minute ultimate run.
Yeah, so this is another team makeup that's not a huge issue with this team, but it might slow you down a little bit, and you just have to be a little bit more careful to get the more damage off on your specials, if possible.
Yeah.
So now we can get into some of the sort of the less obvious considerations for shaving seconds, even though I think maybe you might disagree and say that we've already gotten into some of the less obvious ones, because we're talking about saving, like 5 seconds here, 10 seconds there with the Astro Harness and all that.
Right. So your special specialist really should be a special one specialist, because even if you're using Tantu Totem Master's Death card, there's still times against a power damping team that you could waste a lot of time trying to get that second bar of power.
Yeah, and cases in which you're not dealing quite enough damage, right? Like we talked about earlier, where sometimes you will need to use the second special one. In case we're using a special 2 as your specialist, then you don't really have a backup plan if it doesn't work.
Right. Another less obvious thing is the special that you're using should be the sliding bar mini game.
Ideally,
right? Because tapping for 200%, whether it's that circle or the thermometer, or swiping for 200%, takes too much real time. So even if it doesn't count for your game time clock, it still counts in real time. And we're more worried about just getting through it fast than we are worried about what the number shows at the end of the fight.
Yeah, the other thing that you could use is the minigame where you have to tap specific spots on the screen, and each of them adds like 25% or whatever it is.
Right, and that's pretty fast.
Yeah, but there's not a lot that use that, and I think all of them are special 2s, so, that doesn't work with the previous point, but theoretically that would work too.
And this point about the sliding minigame is part of the reason why Luchador Bane isn't as good as Flashpoint Deathstroke on a team with Flashpoint Batman, because you need to tap for his Luchador Bane's special 1, and you need to swipe for special 2. Both take longer to do.
Yeah. And while Luchador Bane does way more splash damage, and it's a one-hit special 1 to bypass a bunch of things like Astro Harnesses and vulnerabilities, or maybe Raven's Switch, right?
Right.
You waste a lot of time if he doesn't stun, and a one-hit special 1 means that you can never finish with just 2 special ones like Deathstroke can, and his special 1 takes too much real time to finish, and he's sort of vulnerable to tag and stunners, right?
Right.
So you run into situations in which your fights are sometimes longer or sometimes more difficult, and the amount of time you save is, very low.
Right.
If any. The amount of time you save is negative when you take into account actually using his specials.
Right. And even though the advice for this team is we're saying we're saving a lot of time by not looking at the team and not looking at the gears. Remember, if there's a chance you're going to lose, if your team isn't as solid as this one, then you really should look at the gears on the opponent so you can be prepared for the situation that hits. I mean, it seems like it's almost contradictory advice.
Yeah.
It's not. You are either good enough that you can save time by not looking, or don't try to be silly and think you're saving time, but actually lose a fight just because you don't know what you're getting yourself in for.
Unless it takes you 60% more time, the priority is always to win over to go fast.
Right.
So your priorities, you have to sort of do the math a bit too, because to finish up, battle points, right? You can run into circumstances in which you don't have as much stuff, you can get a lower amount of battle points, right? So, that makes the math a little bit more complicated, but assuming you're getting, max or near max battle points, your first priority is always to win consistently, and then your second priority is to always be as fast as possible within the space of winning consistently.
Right.
And it's in that order. And if you need to do something to slow it down because you find, playing more aggressively is making you lose even like 1 in 10 fights, it's not worth it.
Yeah. And we should probably talk about the idea that we want to ride the edge of max battle points.
Yeah, that's the best place to be.
Right, because the higher you are, the more likely you are to face the Astra Harness. And the Astra Harness is the single one thing that will slow you down the most.
Guaranteed. There's no way, consistently around it.
Right. It adds automatically 5 seconds a fight. Might not seem like a lot if your fights are a minute. It is a lot when the fights are 10, 15 seconds.
Yeah, and pretty close to real time 10, 15 seconds.
Right. So best is actually, if every fight is 5,000, you get 21,000 completion bonus. But if your first fight is 4,500, then and every fight after that is 5,000, you're really only losing 800 battle points.
Yeah.
But it means you face fewer Astro Harnesses, you're going to have more consistently faster runs.
Yeah.
And that actually comes more often with a Flashpoint Elite 4 team, which we don't have because we brought them all up to Elite 5. But Elite 4 team, with maybe some augmentations on damage, will get you that 4,500 first fight and 5,000 after. And
to finish up, there's a couple considerations that will sort of stop you or change your math pretty significantly no matter what team you're working with.
Right.
If you have a bad internet connection, right, and you can't play online battles consistently, you're waiting in between, that's going to slow you down. And if you have a slow device, those loading screens are going to be murder on you pretty much no matter what.
Right.
And the proportional time that each fight takes is going to become less and less important.
Right.
And so in cases like that, if you can still win consistently, obviously make your fights faster. But if there's even like a 1% chance you're going to lose, it's better to go a little bit slower, just if you're spending enough time in loading screens anyways.
Right.
Any chance of losing is just even crappier.
Oh, and I guess the tip that we should mention that we didn't say, but you could see with the touches, the visible touches on screen, at the end of the fight, if you hit the power credit symbol at the bottom, then you don't have to watch the whole loading of the stats at the end.
Yeah, that shaves a little bit of time.
And if you just hit where the fight start button is, that can save some of the loading time too, even before they show everything else coming up.
So there we go. Hopefully this was a useful guide to people who have this specific team on exactly how to handle it, and for everybody else a little bit of insight into how you might make a team with whatever you've got going for you. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time. Komoda!